A potential oil spill from a Venezuelan tanker threatening the Caribbean. The government of Guyana on high alert after an attempted attack on the country's chief justice. The Caribbean Public Health Agency pays millions for Caribbean countries to access COVID-19 vaccines. Belize's prime minister says COVID-19 patients will not be allowed to vote in the country's elections. Jamaican dancehall star Buju Banton drawing fire for his comments about wearing a mask. And it was the first adolescent pregnancy prevention week in the Caribbean.
This is the Caribbean Times News with Alisha Davis.
I'm Alisha Davis in New York. Thanks for watching. And we begin with our top story, a potential oil spill threatening the Caribbean. There's growing concern in the region over a Venezuelan oil tanker that environmentalists say is taking on water and threatening to spill 1.3 million barrels of oil into the Gulf between Venezuela and Trinidad and Tobago. A team of experts from Trinidad were allowed to board the vessel and conduct an evaluation. Both Barbados and Guyana have also indicated that they are monitoring the situation. Meanwhile, the government of Guyana is on high alert after an attempted attack on Chief Justice Roxanne George Wiltshire. The police are investigating the incident in which two guards present at the Chief Justice's home were met with an intruder who pointed what looked like a gun at the guards. The intruder then dropped it and fled the scene. In a statement, the government condemned the attack, calling it an assault on democracy. The attack came just hours before the Chief Justice was to hear a case involving challenges to the results of the March 2nd elections. Now to the Caribbean Public Health Agency paying millions for Caribbean countries to access COVID-19 vaccines. The agency has made a down payment of more than $2 million to help Caribbean countries access what's known as the COVAX facility. Now, that's a global collaboration for speeding up the development and distribution of new vaccines to countries around the world, including poorer nations. According to Executive Director Dr. Joy St. John, a coronavirus vaccine will be developed after the clinical trials are completed and vaccines are deemed safe through COVAX. She said that the agency, led in part by the World Health Organization, is pleased to be collaborating with the European Union and Pan American Health Organization. Well, St. Kitts and Nevis has recently joined COVAX, giving the country access to a COVID-19 vaccine when it becomes available. The announcement was made to the National Assembly by Prime Minister Dr. Timothy Harris. The Caribbean Public Health Agency paid a portion of the fee on behalf of the country. The Prime Minister said that the government has invested in putting its citizens' health first. Meanwhile, trials for a COVID-19 vaccine have been approved in the Cayman Islands. A health facility in the country is now seeking 20 volunteers after receiving approval from the Cayman Islands Health Practice Commission for a clinical trial. The medical director of the facility said that she has been working with a number of scientists from the United States who are currently working on a COVID-19 vaccine. And now to Barbados, Prime Minister Mia Mottley saying that it is time for the Caribbean region to take its place as a global leader in technology and innovation. The Prime Minister made these statements during the launch of the IDB's Pivot event.
For us in the Caribbean, the hard truth is that in the last 40 years, our dependency has transitioned from one vulnerable sector, agriculture, to another vulnerable sector, as we now know so well, tourism. Though operationally vastly different industries, the macro analysis presents, unfortunately, similar traits: volatile products, highly fluctuating seasonal revenues, global marketplaces that dictate our prices, and high susceptibility to hurricanes, and now, as we know, pandemics. We must have the cultural confidence to develop technologies of our own kind on a timeline that plays to our strengths and which captures the imagination of our own people. We must become a developer of ideas and technologies that allow us to overcome the everyday disadvantages of being a small island developing state.
Mottley added that the Caribbean region has tackled some of the developed world's most difficult problems like universal education, healthcare systems, and social partnerships. And coming up, people in Belize who test positive for the coronavirus are being banned from voting in the country's election. And dancehall star Buju Banton under fire for his comments about COVID-19. That and more coming up. Stay with us.
Since the coronavirus, global travel seems risky. But with Promo Caribbean, you don't have to worry. Our COVID-19 alerts feature, coupled with our comprehensive travel guide featuring over 20 countries, contains all you need to keep updated and safe during the pandemic. Whether it's Belize, Barbados, Haiti, or Guyana, our travel guide has all you need from safe places to eat, transport options, pharmacies, embassies, hotels, and Airbnbs. Not feeling well? You could take the COVID self-assessment test on our app. If you happen to be in the Caribbean or are looking to travel during these uncertain times, then Promo Caribbean is going to be your best friend. Today more than ever, you need to stay informed and stay safe. With Promo Caribbean, you don't have to worry. We've got you. Download the app from the App Store or Play Store now.
Welcome back to Caribbean Times News. And Belize, where people who test positive for the coronavirus will not be allowed to vote in the country's election. Prime Minister Dean Barrow said that positive COVID-19 patients won't be permitted to vote because of the country's quarantine protocols. The Prime Minister said that there is no legal way to get around that restriction, and making changes to the law to accommodate people who test positive would be difficult. He also fears that people who are not positive could have second thoughts about getting out to vote if this rule was not in place. Well, now to Nigeria, where tensions remain high in Lagos after claims that the police and military have fired on protesters. The U.S. State Department is condemning the use of excessive force by military forces after nearly 2 weeks of protests against alleged police brutality. Amnesty International is reporting that at least 12 people have died. Well, squatters in Guyana are living in harsh conditions after flooding by the Guyana Sugar Corporation. CTN visited the area and spoke with some of the squatters who said that they will continue to occupy the land. They are calling on the government to meet with them face to face to deal with the issue, as they have no other place to go. Now, one resident told CTN that neither the Guyana Sugar Corporation nor the government gave any prior notice of the flooding. The government, through the Civil Defense Commission, has made temporary arrangements to have the squatters who were impacted stay at a school facility. Well, Jamaican dancehall star Buju Banton under fire for comments he made on social media criticizing the government and its mandatory mask policy. Policymakers and many fans have expressed their disappointment with the reggae artist's stance on the mask issue, which they call ignorant. Even Banton's daughter has opposed his comments, pleading with people on Twitter to ignore his dangerous message and, quote, wear your masks. Now to Trinidad, where the government says it will pay for the CXC review. Trinidad's education minister said that the government will pay for the review fees for students who are questioning their grades received from the CXC this year. The cost for covering those review fees could cost the state more than $680,000. Almost 6,000 queries have been received so far from students who sat this year's exams. Well, Guyana's PPP government has unveiled commemorative stamps to celebrate what would have been the late President Janet Jagan's 100th birthday. The government used the anniversary celebration to reflect on the life and work of the former president, saying her legacy is still a driving force today. Jagan was one of the founding members of the PPP and served as Guyana's first female prime minister, vice president, and later the first female president of the Republic of Guyana. During the ceremony, President Irfan Ali said that Jagan devoted her life to the rights of others and highlighted her work as a pioneer of women's rights, her advocacy for press freedom, and her fight for an equal society. He said that it is time for leaders to reflect on the former president's achievements and also work towards the unification of the people of the country. Well, coming up on Caribbean Times News, we are going to talk to Guyana's Deputy Speaker of Parliament, the Honorable Lennox Schumann. And we have got your first look at rapper Nicki Minaj's new baby. It's all ahead. Stay with us.
Mac Shack, New York, dedicated to providing a unique dining experience by offering classic, seasonal, and modern creative macaroni and cheese flavors. Find their locations at MacShackNewYork.com. That's MacShackNY.com.
Welcome back to Caribbean Times News, and we are joined by the Honorable Lennox Schumann. He is Guyana's Deputy Speaker of Parliament. Thank you so much for joining us.
Once again, thank you for having me. It's nice to be able to share some perspective, and I look forward to the discussion.
Definitely. And let's start that discussion with Guyana's economy. Now, it's projected to be the fastest growing economy in the world, thanks to the discovery of oil. And now several U.S. agencies have offered collectively $200 billion in financing for businesses that are interested in investing in Guyana. Now, that's a lot of money especially for a country whose GDP was worth, I guess, approximately $4.2 billion in 2019. So what are your thoughts on this latest initiative by the U.S.?
In terms of the economy and economic or projected economic growth, I know that there are some fantastic GDP figures that are being put out in where they're expecting our economy to be. But I think there is something that a lot of people are not looking at, which is the actual domestic product, right? When you take away the oil and gas sector, what it is that the population is really doing. Do we have the kind of employment to drive the economy independent of oil? I think those are some of the fundamental questions that need to be asked. Right now, or at least when the fields are developed to their capacity, they will not be employing 20 or 30,000 Guyanese. It will be less than 10,000, I think, in terms of Guyanese employed. Now, are we in a position to develop other spin-off sectors that will actually give us an actual domestic product that is somewhat parallel or equal to our gross domestic product? I think those are some of the things that we have to look at. In terms of the $200 billion projected or offered to them in terms of investment, I have a warning, if I were to put it that way, for my friends, family, and everyone looking at Guyana, that we need to do it very, very cautiously. At the end of the day, if a bank says we could lend you $1 million, the bank is not lending you $1 million so that they don't make money on it. They have to find a way to flip that money and make even more. So
Exactly.
when you see an investment of $200 billion coming to Guyana or offered to Guyana, now how do they intend on flipping that? Are we going to be charged $400 billion? Is it $600 billion? What is it that they're going to make from that? Do they want to double or triple their money? That's one component. The second component is how much of Guyana, after all of that investment comes into Guyana, how much of Guyana will actually be owned by Guyanese? As you know, we don't have a land ownership law in Guyana that says that foreigners cannot buy land, because I think Exxon already purchased some land in Guyana. You have other entities that will have purchased properties in Guyana. And we don't have, at least not that I'm aware of, laws that says that Guyanese land can or must remain the sovereign territory, and we must maintain the sovereign ownership of every single inch of Guyana. I have not seen that. I've heard a lot of loose talk about protecting sovereignty and at least the geographical sovereignty and so on. But when this $200 billion comes, how much of Guyana will that $200 billion buy, and will Guyanese still end up owning Guyana? I think those are some questions that need some urgent answers.
Now, you have been a strong advocate for the indigenous population in Guyana, and you proudly represent your indigenous heritage within the government. Now, particularly with COVID-19, what are you doing and encouraging your colleagues in Parliament to do to help with the problems facing indigenous communities and some of the problems in Guyana?
Well, I ran as the presidential candidate for the Liberty and Justice Party, and we joined with A New and United Guyana and the New Movement, and we won collectively one seat. The government has asked if I could be their technical advisor on aviation, civil aviation, that is. But for me, I'm a firm believer in exhaustive dialogue. And if I could get things done for not only Indigenous peoples, but for Guyanese holistically, if I could get things done just by having that dialogue with the various ministers, with the various technical advisors, and so on and so forth, and to be able to influence change at the grassroots level without having to occupy a formal office, then I think my task would have been met. I would have fulfilled my obligation to the people. I did not get into politics for the sheer power, this power-hungry person, so to say. I got into politics to be able to have enough of that authority to influence policy. And if I could do that once again without occupying an office, then that is the ideal position that I would like to be in. So right now, what I have been doing, and you will not see a lot of it in the public domain, is just having those kinds of dialogues with these various ministers and saying, look, can we address shortcomings in our Indigenous communities in a different way? And we offer our perspectives. And some of it they take on, and some of it they don't. But that is the reality of politics, and that is the reality of what needs to be done. We cannot just be combative. We have to find a way to shift the system, to be as gentle as the wind at times, but as harder as a rock when need be. Yeah.
Well, dialogue, very important, and you've raised some important questions with us today. I want to thank you so much for joining us. It was an honor to have you with us.
Thank you so much, and do have a good day.
That was Lennox Schumann, Deputy Speaker of Guyana's Parliament. Well, coming up, the U.S. admits that it cannot find the parents of 545 migrant children who were separated from their families by the Trump administration. And we have got your first look at Trinidadian-born pop star Nicki Minaj's new baby boy. That's ahead. Stay with us. Welcome back to Caribbean Times News. And ACLU lawyers in a legal filing saying that they cannot find the parents of 545 children after the families were separated by the Trump administration's zero-tolerance immigration policy. Well, earlier today, we spoke with Simone Archer of the Caribbean Attorneys Network about this tragedy and the U.S. immigration policies. Simone, thanks for joining us.
Thank you for having me.
Now, Simone, this is a horrible situation, and it's really worth discussing because the Trump administration's immigration policies also impact the Caribbean community. Now, we don't have any data to indicate whether any of the families impacted in this case are from the Caribbean, but nevertheless, how concerned should Caribbean immigrants be by this administration's immigration policies?
Well, the Caribbean families and members should be very concerned. Again, these were children taken away from their parents. They were separated. Then the parents went through some type of immigration proceeding, or maybe they didn't, and then they were deported. So now you have the children here all alone. And these are people that were coming in from all over different areas. So again, as you said, we don't have any specific information if there's anyone from the Caribbean, but there's a possibility that they could be.
Now, in the final presidential debate this past Thursday, President Trump mentioned that the children are treated, he said they're treated, quote, so well taken care of. I mean, many would say that this is an inhumane situation that these children are in. Democratic nominee Joe Biden called it criminal. So with a federal judge ruling that child separation is illegal, what can we expect going forward? And what happens to these poor children and families?
Well, with these children so far, what we know is they're still searching to try to find the family members to see if they can reconnect the children with their family members. But I can say I don't see how these children can be treated nicely if a child is ripped away from their parents in a country that they've never been in. So I don't understand why the president would say that, but we know who we're dealing with. Now, going forward, yes, it's ruled that they're unable to do it any longer. But we don't know what the next step will be. The next step is, will they still detain these families and keep them together? Or will there be more border cities where they won't allow the family members to come in at all?
Yeah, Simone, and now we have this new Supreme Court judge, so we will have to keep an eye on this story. And I want to thank you for joining us.
Thanks for having me.
Simone Archer from the Caribbean Attorneys Network. And coming up, adolescent pregnancy on the rise in the Caribbean. We're going to talk to a panel of experts about this alarming issue. And the Cayman Islands is offering a new global citizen program, but it comes with a hefty price. We're going to be right back with all that and more. Welcome back to Caribbean Times News. And this past week, the Caribbean had its first ever Adolescent Pregnancy Prevention Week. According to the Pan American Health Organization, Latin America and the Caribbean rank second in the world in adolescent pregnancy. Well, earlier today, I spoke with Dr. Sonia Cafe. She's the Pan American Health Organization's Regional Adolescent Health Advisor. Dr. Cafe, thank you for joining us.
Thank you for having me.
So please tell us first, what kinds of numbers are we talking about, and how these pregnancies affect not only the life of the young mother, but also that of her children, family, and community?
Right. Thank you for that question. As you mentioned, our region has the second highest adolescent birth rate in the world. Only the only other region with a higher rate is Sub-Saharan Africa. And the numbers we're talking about is we express it in adolescent fertility rate, which is the number of pregnancies per 1,000 adolescent girls. And in the Caribbean, we have 60 adolescent births per 1,000 girls. And if we express it in terms of percentages of all births, it ranges between 10 and 25%, because it's important to note that we have a wide range of numbers in our region, in the Caribbean region, where we have countries with a very low adolescent fertility rate to very high, among the highest in the world.
And now adolescent pregnancy rates in Latin America and the Caribbean, they remain unacceptably high despite the region's declining total fertility rates. So, Dr. Cafe, what would you say are the reasons for the disparity between the two?
Right. Overall, our region is known as one of the most unequal regions in the world when it also comes to other health challenges. So adolescent fertility is not an exception, but the reason is, one of the main reasons is that very often we implement interventions in a very generic, blanket way without paying attention to very specific groups. When it comes to adolescent pregnancy, we have some groups that have 3 to 4 times higher risk. These include the poorest groups, the lower educated, and rural. In some countries, we also have the issue of some ethnic groups that are more heavily affected. And if we have blanket interventions without taking into account the groups that are most affected and making sure that we reach those groups, then we see that the reduction is very slow. And I think this is one of the main reasons in our region why we see such a slow decline.
And of course, COVID-19 has affected every aspect of life, from schools to work, the economy. I mean, how has COVID-19 affected the life trajectory of adolescent girls?
Yes, COVID-19 is a challenge that is unprecedented, and we already are beginning to see the results when it comes to adolescent fertility. There is, due to the confinement measures, we see that there's an interruption in essential services, including access to sexual reproductive health services, access to information, access to contraceptives. And so that is one issue. On the other hand, we also see the socio-economic impact of COVID-19. We see groups falling back into poverty, and those vulnerabilities increase the likelihood now for an unplanned and unwanted pregnancy. And so, yes, COVID-19 absolutely has an impact, and we need to take that into account. And I think it's very important, and we have emphasized that in the activities this week, to step up actions to ensure that to limit the negative consequences caused by the COVID pandemic.
So what can we do? I mean, how can parents and communities engage young people to help really reduce adolescent pregnancy?
The good news is that we have a lot of evidence about what works globally and also in our region. We know that very important is that there is access to reliable information and education. We also know that it's very important to have access to contraceptives and to remove the legal and societal barriers for young people to access services. These are not easy things to do, but these are what we call the evidence-based interventions. And we have examples in the region of Latin America and the Caribbean where countries have applied these interventions and they have reduced adolescent fertility in 3 to 5 years by significant numbers. And so I find that good news. It's just we need to get it done.
And before we go, any words of wisdom for adolescent girls and boys who may be watching and for their parents as well?
Absolutely. Adolescent sexuality remains a taboo. We need to break that taboo. We have had this week some events led by young people. And I must say, I was impressed by the articulation, the passion, the commitment of young people themselves to make a difference. And so we need to engage young people. We need to give them space, empower them. And I think even if we cannot get it done, they will get it done because they really want to make a difference for themselves and their peers.
So great to hear about that passion. And I want to thank you for your passion on this topic and joining us to talk about it.
Thank you.
That was Dr. Sonia Cafe. And coming up, a new program that lets foreigners live and work in the Cayman Islands. And your first look at Nicki Minaj's new baby. That's just ahead. Stay with us. Welcome back to Caribbean Times News, and Nicki Minaj is sharing a sneak peek of her new baby. Almost 1 month after giving birth, the Trinidadian-born pop star shared a picture of her child's tiny little foot with her 123 million Instagram followers with the caption, "Happy anniversary, my love." Still no word on the baby's name. Minaj announced her pregnancy back in July and welcomed her son into the world on September 30th. Well, Caribbean Airlines has resumed its commercial operations between Guyana and New York. The airline said in a statement that they are pleased to be reconnecting customers in North America and Guyana to their families. The necessary safety protocols will be observed according to international standards for the protection of their customers. Now, earlier this year, Caribbean Airlines was forced to stop flights to a number of countries due to COVID-19. A full flight schedule is set to be released soon. And finally, in our Caribbean Moment by Caribbean Journal, if you're working remotely, Why not do it from the Cayman Islands? The new Global Citizen program permits you to live and work in the Cayman Islands for up to 2 years. But it doesn't come cheap. Applications cost $3,000 US plus $500 US for each dependent accompanying you. To be considered, applicants must have a minimum annual income of $100,000 US or $150,000 US for couples. And that does it for this edition of the Caribbean Times News. You can catch us every Sunday at 7 p.m. Eastern on Caravision and streaming on Facebook Live at 7:30 p.m. Eastern on Sundays. Of course, you can always catch us on our website, CaribbeanTimesNYC.com, and on our YouTube channel. So thanks for watching and have a wonderful week.